Welcome to Hampden-Hampshire and Franklin Conservation District's joint winter workshop series on native plants. Tonight's talk is titled Environmentally Friendly Lawns and Lawn Alternatives and will be presented by Heidi Dollard. Heidi is a co-chair of the steering committee of the Massachusetts Pollinator Network. She works to educate gardeners and homeowners on how they can support pollinators and other beneficial wildlife while creating a beautiful and low-maintenance landscape. Heidi has a master's of science in biology and is a master gardener. She has been an enthusiastic native plant gardener for many years. Heidi was interviewed twice by local news outlets, and her garden was featured on the Fine Gardening blog. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you. Well, now's a good time to start thinking about what you're going to be doing with your yards because everybody's sick of winter and everybody wants to think about things that are green. So let's get started. Yes. So before we start talking about other things to do with a lawn, let's understand what a conventional lawn is. So we plant the plants that constitute a lawn are turf grasses that are not native. None of them are native to North America. They all come from Europe, some of them maybe from Asia. They are mat forming, which makes them very tough and durable. They tolerate heavy traffic, which is really important depending on what you're doing in your yard. Depending on the variety, they are pretty high maintenance. They require fertilizer, sometimes a lot of water, sometimes other chemicals to keep them healthy and looking good. Lawns in the US take up a huge amount of our real estate. Depending on the estimate, something like 63,000 square miles, an area larger than the state of Georgia. It is the largest irrigated crop in the United States. And they are the default landscape. They're what we see all around us, everywhere, anywhere you go in North America and Canada. There's good reasons for it. They really require little expertise to maintain. They're more than culturally acceptable. They're almost demanded by our society. And they really are the standard of beauty for our landscapes. Some homeowner associations and municipal governments actually mandate a short mown lawn, and if you don't comply, you can get in trouble. So where did this lawn dominance come from? Back in the day, for the early part of American history up until about the Civil War, a yard was a place of work. You kept animals there, you had an outhouse, you chopped wood, you stored things, it was your garbage dump. There wasn't any municipal garbage pickup. So it was an area of utility and work. It was not an area of beauty or leisure. But that began to change around the Civil War. There were big changes after the Civil War. There were big changes in American society. A lot of people left the farm and moved into the city. So cities became very industrialized and very, very densely populated. And certainly in urban areas, any outside space was just a mess. It was I mean, if you read like what Manhattan was like or any big city, there were pigs running around, there was manure everywhere. Big apartment buildings still had an outhouse in the backyard. There was, places to dry clothes, maybe places even to wash clothes. So the outdoors, the areas surrounding our residences, both urban and farms, you think of what a working farm looks like now. Chances are it's not a show place. Chances are there's a lot of broken down stuff and big weeds. Unless it's like a gentleman farm, If it's a real working farm where a farmer's making a living on that property, it's going to be a mess. So there was a big push around the mid 1800s to reform our landscape. Visitors from Europe came to visit the United States and commented on how disgusting our our residential landscape looked. So there was a very famous landscape designer, A.J. Downing, who was very influential. He wrote books. A lot of popular magazines encouraged cleaning up the yard, getting rid of those old fences that had kept the pigs out of the vegetable garden. Um, they really wanted, there was this massive wave of civic beautification. So, and a lot of this landscape was really unhealthy too. People were dying of bad diseases from how contaminated their water was and all the dirt and manure around. So both for health reasons and aesthetic reasons, there was this enormous push to change what our landscape looked like. And this was at a time when suburbs were getting developed, and a lot of times the developers really wanted these big sweeping lawns because it was clean, it was spacious, it was healthy, it was upscale, it was genteel. So back before this period, the only people who could afford a lawn were really, really rich people. There were lawns even back in medieval days. But for you to have a lawn, you had to be able to sacrifice a big piece of land to just looking nice. You weren't growing food, you weren't grazing animals. It was conspicuous consumption. So it was this very prestigious, aspirational landscape. So as lawns became more affordable, more and more people wanted to join this communal estate and have this spacious, genteel, uplifting, moral lawn around them. And at the same time, lawnmowers are becoming efficient and affordable. Lawn chemicals after World War II are heavily, heavily pushed by chemical companies. These are companies that had built huge factories for building bombs using a relatively new method for converting atmospheric oxygen into ammonia, which is the basis of many of our nitrogen-based fertilizers. They were using this process to make bombs. But after World War II, they had this huge infrastructure that needed a job. And yes, they did put a lot of those nitrogen fertilizers toward agriculture, but they also really pushed people putting them on their lawns. So homeowners now spend $5.5 billion on lawn care. Every homeowner now is part of this collective estate. So, even in a country where we pride ourselves on being individualistic, in fact, there's tremendous, tremendous peer pressure to conform to this lawn ideal. So as I said, these lawns have huge cultural, emotional, and economic weight. So if you're going to do something with your lawn, you have to kind of different. If you're going to transform your lawn to something else, or if you're just even going to put other plants in your lawn, you're going to be kind of bucking the tide. So it's good to know where all this stuff comes from. So why are we even here? Why are we even interested in ditching the traditional lawn? Well, first of all, pollution, huge problem. Gas mowers and trucks. Mowers do not have pollution controls on them. And all those trucks that are hauling all the mowers all over the place are producing huge amount of pollution and CO2. Lawns, traditional lawns use a lot of water. Used to be in the Northeast, that didn't matter. Now we're having drought. Now there are restrictions on how much you can water your lawn. Those those turf grass roots are really shallow. I'll show you in a minute. They don't sequester carbon or very little carbon. All those lawn chemicals are going into our water and polluting groundwater, and they're polluting our lakes, rivers, and streams and getting into the ocean. They provide little or no value. They're not zero, it's not zero, but it's like a step up, but a small step up from just asphalt. And they take up real estate that could really be could be used to be ecologically valuable. So mowers produce carbon and air pollution, as I said. 503 billion cubic feet of atmospheric greenhouse gases every year from lawn care. With a mow season of 32 weeks, 563 pounds of CO2 for the average lawn. As I mentioned, the gas lawn mowers produce a huge amount of pollution, as much as one lawn mower that goes 1 hour, as much as a car driven for 100 miles. So it's not just carbon dioxide, it's carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and volatile organic compounds. And all that spilled gasoline. I cannot fill my gas-powered mower without spilling some gasoline. And I try really hard, but it still happens. It's really hard to do. And as I said, they use an enormous amount of water, which we can ill afford. In the East, 30% of water usage, 30%. So here's an illustration of what I'm talking about. So this is a very commonly used graphic. You can find it on the internet. It shows the root systems of typical, these are prairie plants. These are native plants that, you could have in your yard instead of lawn. I had to put this red arrow here because otherwise you would never even notice this little piece of turf here. Look how shallow the roots are. And with most or many grass plants, the top growth equals the bottom growth. So if you mow your lawn to 4 inches, it's going to only have 4 inches of root. And you know how shallow those roots are. They don't store carbon, but they form this mat, which, as I said, it's nice because it's walkable, but it also does not infiltrate water. So in a situation where we have periodic heavy rains, flooding, lawns are no help in that regard either. Chemical runoff. Algae blooms. This is an illustration, an actual lake in, I believe it's in Eastern Washington. A friend took this picture with a drone. Some algae is toxic. I mean, really toxic. Like if you jumped in that lake, you would die and your dog would die. Some are not toxic, but they still take up all of the oxygen in the water, so nothing else can live. It's a dead zone. And this is what happens every year in the Gulf of Mexico with all the chemicals that wash out of the Mississippi River. There's this huge dead zone. Last time I read about it, it was the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico. This is from chemical runoff. Yes, a lot of agriculture, but also a lot of lawns. It poisons and it kills fish and it contaminates drinking water, our drinking water. So lawn chemicals are toxic to both people and pets. There's, if you go to the American Veterinary Society website, they will tell you that a dog that runs around on a chemically treated lawn has 7 times greater chance of getting cancer than a dog that is not exposed to those chemicals. Plus, there's other sublethal effects. There's allergies. And if it's going to have this effect on your pets, imagine what it's doing to people, especially small people. So as I mentioned, and this is that now we're getting into some of the really critical problems. Lawns do not provide food or habitat for any kind of wildlife, large or small. Yeah, there's some critters in your lawn. There's probably Japanese beetle grubs, which are non-native and you don't want them anyway. There's just a small percentage of critters that can live in a traditional lawn. And this is one reason why we're seeing this huge biodiversity crisis that the globe is suffering at this moment. We see huge numbers of birds disappearing from our landscape. 2.9 billion birds. We have 2.9 fewer billion birds than we did since 1970, since I was, a teenager. 30% of mammals are at risk of extinction. And the thing that we really hammer on is that we need insects to feed both those birds and those mammals. The insects are the means by which all the calories locked up in plants are transferred into animals. Plants create all this food through photosynthesis. They're capturing the energy from the sun. Animals can't photosynthesize. So they need to get that energy that the sun provides by eating plants directly. And if they can't eat plants, they eat insects. Most of them eat insects, and that's how the energy moves up the food chain. So if we lose all those insects, we're breaking the food chain. Plus, many of those insects are essential pollinators. And without pollinators, we lose actually most of our flowering plants and many of our food plants as well. So this is a crisis. We have to start doing something differently. And that different thing that we need to do is take a good hard look at our lawns, because that's where the big opportunity is. Big question is, can you reduce your lawn? And how do you go about that? You probably need at least some lawn. It's a rare person who lives in a suburban or semi-rural area that doesn't need some kind of lawn. If you have pets, if you have kids, if you have backyard sports, if you want to put a picnic table out in your backyard, you need a lawn, because no native plant can provide that really tough walking surface that a lawn can provide. But if you reverse the amount of lawn and gardens or area planted with other stuff, so that the lawn area is now a path, or just a little, instead of like wall-to-wall carpet, it's a little area carpet in your landscape. You can devote a huge amount of area to other plants which have ecological value. So if you think paths, not little island beds in a sea of grass, you have a lot of space to work with. So slopes, under trees, any area you're not using, you can convert to flower beds, ground cover, and or trees and bushes, or some very attractive combination. So what do we need? If we're going to replace our lawn, what requirements does it need to fulfill? First and foremost, needs to provide food and habitat for pollinators and other essential wildlife, insects. Yes, whenever I talk about actually feeding insects, there's always a few people who are like, what? We don't like insects. We want to get rid of them. Well, we need them, and we need to feed them. So yeah, we need to run an insect farm in our yard. So a lawn alternative needs to tolerate at least some regular foot traffic. It has to be attractive to ourselves, to our neighbors, to our community. We can't create more work for ourselves. There's very few people that are laying around looking to do more yard maintenance. We can't be using more water than we already are, and we absolutely cannot be using chemicals. So what can we do? Here's suggestion number one. There are a number of native sedges. The genus is Carex, that's the Latin name. The one that has been recommended most commonly is Carex pennsylvanica, Pennsylvania sedge. And this is a picture of it. This guy, Larry Weiner, is one of my ecological landscape heroes. He runs a big, famous ecological landscaping design firm outside of Philadelphia, and he has done beautiful, beautiful work that's, really great for people, great for pollinators. And here he's using this Pennsylvania sedge as a ground cover. You can see that it grows kind of tall, like, maybe a foot, and then it flops over. But it still looks kind of cool, and it looks like grass. You could mow it. You have to mow it rather high. It's walkable. It can't take as much foot traffic as a traditional lawn, but it can take quite a bit. Excellent wildlife value, feeds all kinds of critters. Looks nice if you don't mow it. It has this kind of, wavy, I don't know, furry look. It hosts 36 caterpillar species. That's really good. The downside is it is expensive. You cannot grow it, you cannot easily grow this grass from seed. So you would need to buy plugs, and covering a large area would cost you a fair amount of money. But, it does spread. So if you start with a relatively small area, as it fills in, you can take pieces of it and move to other areas. So, over a period of years, you could cover a significant area with it. You have to do it properly, removing the old traditional lawn. It's not fast growing, but it does spread. And it can't take full sun. It needs at least partial shade, and it can actually do well in full shade. And the Mount Cuba Center is this famous native plant garden in Delaware. And they've done a whole study on various native Carex species. And so here's their link. I also have it in the resource document that Megan will send out at the end of this talk. So that's a very real possibility. And there's a lot of other Carex species which could work well too. Wild strawberry. This is the top recommendation of Dan Jaffe Wilder, who's another one of our local native plant champions. He used to work at Garden in the Woods, and this is a photo of Garden in the Woods. If you haven't been there, I really recommend it. It's in Framingham, just really inspiring. Can really see what can be done with native plants. In any case, this is their wild strawberry lawn. Um, it's very cost effective, very easy to grow these plants. They spread quickly. If you invest in just a few, after a few years, you'll have a lot. You can grow them from seed. Huge wildlife value. You could eat the fruit if you can get to it before the chipmunks do. Somewhat evergreen, which is nice. Will happy in a very wide range of growing conditions, from full sun to quite a bit of shade. On the downside, it looks like ground cover. Even though it's walkable, a lot of people are not going to feel like they want to walk on it. It's not inviting, but has very many, even if you don't use it to cover all of your lawn, it could be really nice to plant under some trees where you're not necessarily doing a lot of walking. And then if you have grass paths. So there's moss. It's hard to establish moss unless it wants to be there. So if you already have moss, if moss has chosen you, this may be your best alternative because it requires almost no inputs. If it's well established, you just go with it. You don't mow it. The one thing you do have to do is you have to clear leaves and other debris off of it, or it will kill the moss under a leaf or under a fallen branch. And over here on the right is a picture that I took in a famous garden in Japan where they love moss. It is hugely important part of their decorative landscape. And you can see it's magnificent. It's beautiful color, beautiful texture. Really, it's very, very scenic. But on the right is a house in a development it says in Echo Hill in Amherst. And these people very intelligently made the decision not to fight the moss, but to just let it grow. And this is this lovely hillside with moss. So if moss chooses you, maybe you should just say, okay, we'll go with that. Here is a very interesting alternative. The Cornell Extension people have been working on a alternative they call a Cornell lawn. You can also go to their website and they have a great informational webinar video you can watch. They have the plant list. It's a mix of native grasses and perennial flowering plants. The one of the great things about it is it's not a monoculture. So as conditions change, like if you have a wetter year or a drier year, something in there is going to be happy and is going to take over from whatever was not happy. So it's very resilient, and resiliency is certainly something we're looking for in times of climate change. Very biodiverse because there's all these different species in there. It's all these different plants are supporting a very wide range of insect species. So it has huge wildlife value. On the downside, it also looks like ground cover. In fact, I went to visit this lawn a couple summers ago, and at first I couldn't find it because didn't I it just looked like ground cover until I found a sign that said, walk here. And then I realized, oh, this is the Cornell lawn. Um, People are not going to, guests are not going to feel that it's comfortable to walk on it because they're going to be stepping on flowers and stuff. But it is walkable. That means, you're not going to kill stuff if you walk around on it a bit, not a lot. Um, some plants in the list are not easy to find in the trade. You might have to go through some effort to find them or grow them from seed yourself. This particular combination of things really seems to do best in sandy soil. Also, it has a recommended mown height of 8 inches. So you can't mow it with a regular mower. You'd have to mow it with a weed whacker. But, it is quite lovely. And, I think it it could really work well for a lot of people. So now we're into the non-native alternatives. And this is a picture of white clover. There's a lot of different cultivars. There's a mini clover. All varieties of clover are very mowable and very walkable. In fact, before the chemical companies came up with all these herbicides, which killed broad-leaved plants, when you put down an herbicide, it kills the broadleaf plants, but it doesn't kill the grass. Most lawn mixes came with clover mixed in. And the reason is it's a really nice complement to the grasses. First of all, it fixes nitrogen, so it's feeding the grasses without any additional fertilizer. Secondly, it's very green and it stays green in a lot of conditions under which grass does not stay green, like if the dogs pee on it or if it gets very dry, it stays green. And it's very, very walkable. It's very soft and cool on bare feet. And there's, as I said, there's these low growing mini varieties available. On the downside, so I planted a test plot and it looked fabulous for 2 or 3 years. And then other things started taking over. And so what I think I needed to do is I needed to overseed it every year to make sure that the clover remained the dominant species. So that's why I said I think that it requires yearly residing, and it isn't tolerant of very severe drought. If we really get a scorching dry summer, it probably would die. However, thyme loves dry soil and dry weather. So if you have a hot, sunny place with terrible soil, this is a really good alternative, either for the entire lawn or to mix in with grasses. It's mat forming, it's very walkable, it's not soft. You may not want to walk on it with bare feet. But there's a lot of low-growing varieties available, very drought tolerant. You can grow it from seed, so it's very cost effective, but it needs the right growing conditions, which is pretty much true of most plants. You need to choose the right plant for your conditions. So there's eco grass, which you may have heard about. It gets a lot of press. This is a mixture of non-native, oftentimes fine fescues, and they've been developed to grow very slowly, to not need any fertilizer or any water. They're super low maintenance. Sometimes, you only need to mow it like twice a year. On the downside, well, it's not cheap. It takes a while to get established, especially if you're replacing a traditional lawn. You need to get a mix suited to your conditions. So you have to understand what your conditions are. And then you have to, if you have the expertise to choose the right mix, you can do that. Otherwise, you can call the people at one of these sources at Helia Natives, Prairie Moon, or East Ernst Seeds, and they will advise you and they may make you a custom mix. By itself, it doesn't have a huge amount of wildlife value, again, because they're non-native grasses. But if you mix in a lot of the other stuff that I mentioned and a lot of stuff that I will mention in the upcoming slides, you can make it. You can make that area much more ecologically useful. So a lot of people have commented to me when they stop fertilizing their traditional lawn, it goes from, this beautiful emerald carpet to looking terrible, because a lot of these grasses are really, they are bred to be grown with a lot of nitrogen inputs. So once you take them off life support, it just looks terrible. This happened to one of my neighbors in my last neighborhood. They moved into this house where the previous owners had a very chemically intensive lawn care company come in, and they spread huge amounts of nitrogen fertilizer constantly. And the grass was really green. And the new people came in, they had little kids. They're like, woof, we don't want that stuff. Well, very quickly, their lawn looked terrible. And I think they were a little surprised. They didn't realize how chemically dependent the lawn was when they bought the house. But if that happens, you have to be ready to start overseeding with other stuff, which could be preferably one of these eco lawn mixes. And then over a series of years, the old traditional turf varieties will disappear, and you'll be left with just the ecological grass. So here's a bee lawn. A bee lawn is a grass lawn with a lot of flowering plants added. In this picture, we see two things. This is white clover, and this is a charming little native plant called self-heal, or prunella is the Latin name. Very available through native plant nurseries. You can get little plugs of it and put it in your lawn. I have done this in my yard and been very pleased with how easy it is to grow and how lovely it looks in the lawn. And it is a native plant, so it both feeds caterpillars and the flowers feed pollinators, bees and butterflies, which is great. Very walkable, very mowable. This can be a really attractive alternative to a traditional lawn, having all these low growing flowering plants. So it is at least some grass, so it has the benefits of grass. Your neighbors will say, "Oh yeah, they have a lawn. It's got all these flowers in it, but yeah, it's okay." Um, it does have pollinator value. It's fairly easy to create this, but you have to mow it high enough so that you don't cut off the flowers. So again, this is probably at least 4 inches, preferably, maybe 6 inches. A lot of mowers don't go that low. You might be using a weed whacker. I don't, I'm not sure what you can do with newer mowers. Mine doesn't go that high. Um, so the neighbors may think it's a little bit on the hairy edge. So uh, they may think that you're just ignoring your lawn when in reality you're cultivating an ecologically useful lawn. These are other native plants that can contribute to a bee lawn and contribute flowers. Bluets often they just seed themselves, usually if you have pretty crappy soil. Child's Park in Northampton in the spring has huge, huge swaths of these bluets, which I think is just so charming. It's this kind of light blue haze over the grasses. And they're very short. They're only maybe 2, 3 inches tops. They're just beautiful. In some parts of the country, they're called Quaker ladies, which I think is also very charming. And I have some of them in my yard. I'm not sure how you get them. You can buy seed. I don't know how it is easy it is, but it's one of those things where if you have them, you should cherish them. And maybe you could even dig up some from a friend's lawn if they have some. But they do very well in pretty poor conditions. And then there's violets, which are just I love them. They can make a great ground cover. They're great mixed in with the lawn. So many people say, violets, I hate them. Yes, they can be very aggressive, but they are host plant for a lot of caterpillars. They flower early, they provide nectar and pollen. They're so beautiful. How can you not love these lovely little purple flowers? Okay, you can pull them out of the vegetable garden, but then plant them in your lawn and celebrate how hardy and tough they are. They are mowable, they're walkable. Again, here's that prunella. And then believe it or not, there are some low growing asters, which you can mix into your lawn. And this one that is a variety of heath aster called snow, snow, snowbank, which is bred to be very low. But there even wild asters that have just seeded themselves into my lawn often will flower even when they're just like 3 inches high. And that's true of this great blue lobelia too. So be looking out to see what volunteers you have in your garden and I mean in your lawn and encourage them and maybe spread them around. Here's more native mix-in. Spring Beauty is a early flowering bulb. And Moss Phlox, very available. You can buy this anywhere and looks great mixed in with a lawn. When it's not in bloom, the foliage is lovely. And it can take some light foot traffic. I wouldn't put it in a path where I was walking a lot, but you can walk on it a few times a week and it wouldn't care. And then this is pussy toes, which a lot of people see it as a lawn weed, but it has great ecological value. Again, it's a host to a lot of caterpillars, which, then become moths and butterflies. So pollinators. So when you're adding non-native grass species or adding eco-grass to an existing lawn, your options are interplanting with plugs or small plants. And here's a picture of a plug um, that is, it has a great root system. I may have taken this at Wing and a Prayer Nursery. So at Wing and a Prayer, or a lot of places where you buy plugs, a plug this size might cost $2.50 or $3. So they're very cost effective. You still have to plant them well and keep them watered until they establish. But this is a good thing to add to your lawn. And then there's overseeding. If you do, you have to be really, really, really careful to dethatch first to get all the dead grass out between the living grass so that the seeds make really good soil contact. And if you stop using chemicals, you'll probably have a lot of dead plant material. So that's especially important then. So you can also just do a massive lawn removal. You can get sod cutters, either a manual one or a gas-powered one. You can rent these. The downside of this is, you're actually removing the topsoil, which has a lot of good stuff in it, not only a lot of organic matter, but also it harbors a whole ecosystem of small invertebrates and microbes and fungi and stuff that's actually would be good for your future lawn replacement. So my favorite is to smother with cardboard, and that's what somebody has done here. They have laid down cardboard and then they have either some leaves or some wood chips over it. And in order to do that, you have to cut the lawn very, very low, make it very wet, water it heavily, put down very, very, very thorough layer of cardboard. There can't be any chinks between the pieces. Each piece has to overlap by several inches, and then water it again, and then put either a heavy layer of wood chips over it, or if it's a lighter layer, like it's leaves, you're going to have to nail it down with landscape staples or with rocks to make sure that the wind doesn't pick it up and carry it away. You can also solarize with black or clear plastic, and a lot of the experts that are writing books now about lawn replacements use this method. I am not a fan. I think it's not that easy. You have to really do it right. And then you're left with all this plastic that what are you going to do with it? Send it to the landfill? We already have too much plastic in the landfill. But cardboard is great. It breaks down. So that's why I'm a fan of the cardboard smother method. One thing you should not do under any circumstances is get out your rototiller and try to rototill your lawn into oblivion, because all you'll do is make the surface full of lumps, and that turf lawn is so tough, it will just keep coming back again and again and again. And if you rototill your lawn too much, you totally destroy the structure and you actually make it very compacted. So don't even think of that. So for all lawn options, what's important is that you just avoid all chemicals of any kind. A lot of people have traditionally put lime on their lawns. And here's a little interesting factoid. I can't give you the specifics on this, but Larry Weiner, who I mentioned earlier, works with his daughter named Sarah. And apparently she lives in a suburb of Philadelphia and had a traditional lawn, which she wanted to kill. And she did it by applying elemental sulfur, which if you grow blueberries or other acid-loving plants, will turn the soil acid. And indeed, turf grasses like their pH a little on the high side. They like it sweet. Our natural pH in most of New England is a little on the acid side, which is what, most perennials and vegetables like. But if you make it even more acid than that, you can really not just kill the lawn, but you can disable it enough so that other plants will be able to outcompete it. So this is an interesting idea, but I don't know the details. So if you can research it, maybe you can do it well. But the problem with elemental sulfur is you don't want to overdo it. So anyway, maybe you could pursue this if you find that interesting. But for all lawns, going back to all options, don't use chemicals, mow every 2 or 3 weeks or less, mow as high as possible, 4 inches or taller, because that's actually really good for the grass. It gives them deeper roots, harbors more wildlife, more flowers, and but you may have to use a weed whacker instead of a lawnmower. Here is an extremely important feature if you're going to have a wilder, messier lawn than a traditional smooth monoculture of turf. And that is what the Xerces Society calls cues to care. This is where you introduce elements into your landscape that indicate that there is a strong human hand at work here, and it is not neglected, and it is not the wild wilderness taking over your neighborhood. And here are some of the features. Here are some of the cues to care. First of all, clean, sharp edges. And in this picture, this is a picture I took in one of my favorite public gardens. It's from Chanticleer outside of Philadelphia. And this is their flowering lawn, which is, pretty wild looking. But they have made it acceptable. They have said to the public, don't worry, this wild stuff is well under control because we have these sharp edges. So they have not one, but two, but really they have this sharp edge. Then they have this very smooth traditional lawn on the edge, then another edging, and then they have a hardscape. So this is really boxed in. There's a lot of cues to care here. But a simple mown path and border or a mown border. Like if you wanted to have a meadow in your front yard, I would strongly recommend mowing 1 mower's width around the edge. So along your driveway, along the sidewalk, and then along the property line, so that that meadow had this neat mown, edging around it, it really makes it much more acceptable to people who are not necessarily a fan of a natural landscape design. These straight lines, hardscape, fences, stone walls, putting up an informational sign that says this is a pollinator meadow can really, really help change people's minds about what's going on. Because if they need to realize this is intentional, this is not neglect. So what about weeds? Yep, weeds are going to be there. Some of them I just are not worth messing with. Dandelions, you could dig them out if you wanted, but you've you've probably have bigger fish to fry in your life. There's creeping Charlie, which is just so aggressive. If you have big swaths of it, you could try smothering it. You could try pulling it, but it's practically impossible to get rid of. But bees do like it, and they also like the dandelions. Crabgrass, you can outsmart because it's an annual grass. So if you overseed in the fall with a cool season grass, or early enough at the right time with clover, that can get a head start. And then come the spring when the crabgrass would be germinating, there's already something in that space. And crabgrass needs sunlight. So again, if you leave your lawn high, you will reduce crabgrass. So that is just through clever turf management. You can really, really, really get rid of crabgrass or reduce it significantly. There's other stuff like cinquefoil, chamomile. You just have to accept that you're going to have this biodiverse lawn, and it's okay. It's really okay. Ticks. Many people are very concerned about ticks, and entirely justified. But ticks are not usually found on tall lawns. Even if your lawn is 6 or even 8 inches, it's probably not going to have any ticks in it. Ticks show up in moist areas where the vegetation is probably at least knee height. And this is, again, where the importance of paths come in. You want people to be able to get around your property and not brush against the foliage. A lot of people don't want to touch plants unless it's their choice. They don't want to be put in a position where they have to brush against foliage. And one of the reasons is ticks. And actually, they have a point, because at knee-high or higher foliage, you're more likely to have ticks. They especially like forest edges with deep leaf piles, which I certainly had on my property for about 30 years because I raked all the leaves into the surrounding woods. That's like perfect tick habitat. But Susanna Lerner, who was at UMass, now she's with USDA, did a number of experiments with longer lawns on looking at their ecological value. And she did not find any ticks in taller lawns, zero. This was in suburban Springfield. So if you are in an area where you may experience ticks, like you're adding plants to your meadow, you should just protect yourself appropriately. With the appropriate spray and clothing. You can buy clothing that is that has been treated with pyrethrins. That is very toxic to ticks. Unfortunately, it's also very toxic to cats. So be very careful with that if you have cats. You can buy it, you can apply it yourself. I do use DEET on my clothes. I don't use DEET directly on my skin. I tuck my pants into my socks, and then I spray my socks with DEET, and I do not get ticks. And I travel in very, very ticky areas, and it works. And I hear from people all the time, hunters, people spend a lot of time in the woods. They do that, they do not get ticks. But if you encourage a diverse wildlife, your wildlife will be eating the ticks. Here's another important fact about ticks. If you have a lot of invasive species in your yard, that often encourages the white-footed mouse population, which is a vector which carries ticks that carry Lyme disease. So particularly barberry is apparently has been implicated as perfect mouse habitat because the barbs protect the mice from predators. They harbor ticks. Ticks harbor Lyme disease. Now you're at a much greater chance of contracting Lyme disease. So get rid of those invasives, particularly the Japanese barberry. So no mow May, is that a good idea? Well, it was a good idea because it really got people thinking about not mowing their lawns, it's just like that's the easiest thing to make better habitat. But is it the ideal? No, no, no. If I did no, I have never planted a lawn seed in my yard, and yet my lawn area, even though I don't, I don't apply chemicals, I don't have particularly good soil, I would not be able to mow it by the end of May if I really did no mow May. So that's not going to work. Um, the ideal thing is to just mow less the entire year, ideally every 2 or 3 weeks, and to mow, leave it as high as your machinery will allow, like 6 inches. And that will be the best for the plants, for the ecology, and for you. So how to get started? First of all, you have to understand your growing conditions because you do not want to buy seeds or plants that aren't going to be happy where you live. You cannot be changing your environment to please other plants. You got to choose plants, right plant, right place. I can't say that enough. Then determine your goals. What do you need? Do you just want to make your existing lawn more ecologically useful? Do you want to replace the lawn? Do you want to, have you identified the area? Do you have a slope that you could put, a bunch of trees or bushes there? So once you figure that out, you need to choose the right plants. And then I really recommend starting with a small area experiment, so maybe lay cardboard over maybe 6 by 10 area. That's, doable, and see what works. Plant some different things that you think you might like. And if you go with what is working, don't don't keep planting plants that aren't going to be happy. Plant plants that are going to grow vigorously and spread, and plants that replicate themselves save you a lot of money. The soft landing garden, I've been recommending this configuration for a while, but I didn't realize until just a few weeks ago that it has a name. It's called the soft landing garden. And what it consists of is a native tree or native woody plant of some kind, but I think a tree is often a really good choice. And a lot of people already have a tree that they can work with. And then underneath this tree is some native plants at an appropriate height. It could be, just a very low growing ground cover. It could be something higher. It could be a mixture of grasses that were like 18 inches or 2 feet. It could be something much more formal. So here is, our native paper birch, white birches. I'm not sure what this is, but I'm pretty sure it's a native plant. And then over here is some native grasses. Let me take a drink. And so it can look pretty informal, like the one on the left, or it can look more formal, like the one on the right. The one on the right is a design by Oman von Sweden, who are very famous, uh, to make a pun, groundbreaking landscape architects in the 1980s and 90s. And their company is still very active, although both of them have since died. But this illustrates a lot of what I'm talking about, these sharp edges here, and even the contrast between the trunk and this soft horizontal surface is, this is a sharp edge, that's a sharp edge. This is very soothing. And the reason it is so important is because there are bazillions and bazillions of important insects that live in the tree canopy. They're living up, either clinging to the twigs or to the leaves. And then in the winter, they need somewhere to go. So they fall to the ground, sometimes still clinging to their leaf. And they need to that leaf needs to pretty much stay where it fell for the insect to make it through the winter. Either the insect needs to live in the leaf litter, pretty much undisturbed, or it crawls into the soil underneath the leaves. And after a few years of just letting the leaves stay where they fall, that soil underneath that leaf litter becomes very soft and porous. And that's why we call this soft landings. It's a layer of the leaf litter, and underneath is all those years and years of rotting leaves, which are mixed into the soil. And that is just this perfect habitat for literally thousands of critical species to overwinter. So if you rake away the leaves that fell under your native trees and cart them off to the dump, you have now ended the life cycle of all of those insects. They're once they're in the dump, they're probably buried many feet under. They're never going to see the light of day again. Or if you've mown them, if you've chopped them, they're gone. They're pulverized. That's why it's really important to have a garden situation where you can just let the leaves stay put. And this is the ideal situation. You can see it's very beautiful. I think this would be very acceptable in really any suburban situation, especially if this were surrounded by a nice mown border. So that's really what I encourage people to think about. That is, I think, one of the best uses you can make of converting some lawn into useful habitat. This is my favorite quote from Doug Tallamy. I have to read it to you. These are exciting times. The necessary task of restoring ecological function to the land lies before us, but is an exhilarating, entertaining, and hugely rewarding task. And I can tell you, it really is rewarding. When you put in these native plants, you will see untold numbers of insects returning to your yard. You will see some plants are just going to be thrumming with life, and birds will come. You will be astounded at the amount of life that you can host in what was previously really a barren landscape. So it really is very exciting and rewarding. And if you have not read Doug Tallamy, who is kind of the grand old man of this native plant movement, he's an entomologist from University of Delaware. I really encourage you to read his book, Nature's Best Hope. So we can save species and our ecology and ourselves by managing our yards to support wildlife. And I love this photo. This woman is actually illustrating a lot of what I have been saying. She has a mown border, she has hardscape, she has a path, and she has all these great signs. And I love the expression on her face. I just think this epitomizes, I mean, maybe you don't need this giant meadow in your yard. I'm not saying you need that, but she is on a mission, and we need to be on that mission too. So thank you for your attention. I can take questions. I encourage you to sign up for the Massachusetts Pollinator mailing list. We have a yearly monthly webinar. We also have a brown bag lunch where you can just log into Zoom and join the conversation or not, just listen to what other people are saying or pose questions, getting your tough garden questions answered. And it's very interesting. So we usually have a good turnout for that. So I can take questions now, Megan. I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Heidi. Um, I'm glad you mentioned about the signs because one thing that I often forget to mention about our native plants program is that when you schedule your consultation with one of our native plant experts and then you receive a set or we reserve you a set of native plant plugs to go and pick up from one of our partner nurseries, we also have lawn signs that are meant to kind of explain to your neighbors what's going on.
Nice.
And also to get the word out. It's got a QR code on there too, so that people can be like, what am I looking at? Oh, I can get involved too. So we have signs for you if you participate in our program.
Good.
Thank you, Heidi. Let's look at the chat. Let's see. Melissa Curtin says, I attended a talk given by Sarah, Larry's daughter, yesterday
Oh,
at
really?
yeah, at ELA.
Oh, the Ecological
Oh,
Landscape Association. Yeah,
right. She and Larry now believe the sulfur was unnecessary.
really.
Dethatching and it says VVV low mowing combined beat back the lawn enough and then overseeding with wildflowers that gradually filled in and outcompeted most of the non-native grass. So that's a cool update.
Good, good.
There's
Thank you.
Melissa. You want to talk to us,
Yeah,
Melissa?
yeah, sorry. VVV means very, very, very.
Oh.
So, yeah, Sarah gave a talk about turning her suburban lawn, as you mentioned, Heidi,
Uh-huh.
into a meadow. And she's not, she wasn't, she's not a landscaper. Her dad, of course, is. And she said to her dad that I'm tired of mowing the lawn twice a week, all summer long, because living outside of Philly, I think, the
Yeah.
weather was conducive to that. So she said, I want to do a meadow. But she lives in a very traditional neighborhood that are large houses, large yards, and short lawn that's
Mhm.
treated. And so she didn't want to offend her new neighbors. So they did this gradually. But what they did is they did do a lot of thatching and removed the thatch a couple of times. I put in her little timeline slide
Hmm.
down below. And they did do the sulfur. They had done a soil test for the pH. And Larry thought, well, maybe we'll lower it a little bit just to kind of stress the
Right,
non-native grasses a
right.
little bit. But he
Yeah.
doesn't, neither of them really think that that was necessary,
Oh, good.
that the sulfur. They really think it was the dethatching and the cutting very, very short of the grass and then keeping at that and then interseeding with, and what she did is she put in plants in certain little islands at first. Sorry, I got my earbuds in. Plants in for little islands to make it attractive to neighbors, and then seeded the wildflowers and nursed those along. And she cut them at about 8 inches or something at times, just to keep things a little sane,
Yeah,
till the meadow part grew in.
yeah.
And she did the edging. She always had an edge, a framing, and mowed paths. Uh, so it looked intentional, and put up a sign. And they also had a large dogwood that she put a couple of in their front yard, that she put a couple of Adirondack chairs where it was mowed. So it looked very intentional there and where they would hang out. So, and they've
Perfect.
gotten really good feedback.
Yeah.
And they did the article in the New York Times a year or so ago.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's where she mentioned the sulfur.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
good. Then I don't have to worry about learning more about
The sulfur.
right,
It's good
sulfur.
to
Yeah.
have an update on that. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
great. And thanks for the timeline too. Let's see. We have a question from Jan about, or Jan. I apologize if it's Jan and I said it Jan. If there's moss in poor grass, about half and half, but the moss never seems to win, is there a way to encourage it?
Yeah, I mean, again, what you want to do is just get rid of the grass, which, if it's a small enough area, you could just pull it out. And then so moss actually doesn't have roots. It just sits on top of the soil and it really likes very compacted soil, which
Mhm.
a lot of our lawns are because of all the times we've been mowing it and walking on it. It gets very compacted. So in a way, it's making the best of a bad situation. So I haven't tried it myself, although I did have a moss lawn um, at my last house. I have read that you can, if you create a blank area and you take some of the moss and you blend it up, believe it or not, with buttermilk in your blender, and then you spread it back out over, you know, an area that's been cleared, it will grow.
Yeah. I know people who've tried it, and
Does it
especially
work?
yeah, it does. And I think it depends on how moist you're able to keep it, right? Like if it's not already a place that moss
Right.
likes to be, but that you can
Well,
spread.
moss needs to be in a place where where not only is the ground a little moist, but it really likes the air to be a little moist too.
Right.
So in those two pictures, you saw that it was kind of in a wooded area where there probably wasn't much air moving around. And
Mhm.
that's really what it likes. So
Mhm.
if you do have a mossy area, and this is what in retrospect, I wish that I had done in my old lawn, but I didn't know. Yeah, it was before I knew anything. Um, I should have planted a lot of bushes. I had a lot of oak trees, and so it was just the oak trees coming out of the moss. And if I had planted some nice rhododendrons or, native rhododendrons, native azaleas, I think that that would have kept a lot of more moisture at the ground level, just in the air. And that would have really helped the moss out. In that picture of the Japanese garden, that's what we saw when we saw really healthy moss. There was a lot of bushes that were holding in the damp air
Right. And the shade too, right? I mean, it
and
really
the
likes
shade.
shade.
Yeah. Though
Um,
there are some mosses that will, believe it or not, will grow in full sun, but
mm,
they're not very attractive. I wouldn't go with moss in a full sun location.
mhm. Thanks for that. So we've got another question. Oh, which before we leave moss, I had a question about moss because
Uh-huh.
knowing that it doesn't really have root structure, which creates infiltration and a healthier
Yeah.
soil environment. Other than the ecological benefit of not mowing, which is not
Yeah.
contributing to CO2 and warming, what are the other ecological benefits of moss?
Well, it does. If actually, there's a great book by the same person who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Has anyone read
Oh
that?
yeah. Yeah.
She wrote I think it's called Collecting Moss.
Okay.
Gathering Moss. It is one of the best pieces of nature writing I've ever read. I actually loved it way more than Braiding Sweetgrass. And she talks about all the little critters that live in the moss. It's its own ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not doesn't do anything for pollinators. Actually, some of those bluets at
Yep, they
Mount
grow in it,
Cuba,
right?
they grow in moss,
They do in
which
my
is,
yard. The
yeah,
mice and the
which is kind
bluets
of
like each
cool.
other.
So if you have moss and you want to convert it to something else, it's going to be a project because the moss means you have very poor compacted soil. So yeah, you could try to get rid of the moss, but you would have to bring in a lot of organic matter, possibly digging it in, tilling. Um, yeah, it would be a major project. So if you have moss and it's happy, I think the best thing to do is to just have moss paths and then add bushes to the landscape. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to add on to the end of this question. So the question is Queen Anne's lace native or invasive? Can you also distinguish non-native, non-invasive? Can you talk about those categories? Native,
Maybe I
non-native,
skipped. Oh,
non-invasive, and
oh,
invasive?
thank you for entering the gathering by Robin. Yeah, it's great.
Sure.
No, Queen Anne's lace is not native. It's I don't think it's listed on any invasive plant list, but it is extremely aggressive. And I really love it. A lot of people love the way it looks. It's in the carrot family.
Mhm.
So actually, for a non-native, it has more wildlife value than most non-native plants because there are some of our native caterpillars can eat plants in the carrot family. So dill, fennel, carrots, um, parsley maybe. Anyway, what I do, because I have a lot of meadowy area and, just wild areas, I pull, I pull most of it because otherwise it just is way, it will take over. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about getting rid of every last bit of it, but I think you need to keep it under control or it will just displace other things that you would much rather have. But
Yeah,
some
that's
of
what
it,
Anne is saying. She's
a bit
saying,
of it
I
looks
don't
really
mow.
cool.
When I don't mow, it takes over large sections of the yard. Yeah. I mean, that's what I think maybe we haven't talked about it here in these workshops, but is that if you are kind of letting your lawn move in the direction of meadow, you have to be kind of surgically removing
You
the,
do.
the species you
Yeah, a
don't want.
meadow, I think there's a lot of people say, oh, natives, there's so much less work. Well, it sort of depends.
Mm,
They're not no work. There's no such thing as a landscape that's zero work unless it's just the woods, unless you're just surrounded by um, a mature woods. And even then, you're going to have invasive species that you're going to have to remove, like bittersweet and multiflora, especially bittersweet in the woods, multiflora rose. So it's just different work. I mean, in my opinion, I would much rather spend an hour leisurely pulling weeds and listening to the birds than mowing the lawn, which is, walking or riding this awful, noisy, gas emitting, you know, polluting machine. But, it's a different kind of work. And yeah, a meadow, you may have to surgically remove bad plants that would be too aggressive. And you do have to mow it periodically. At least what the experts now recommend is if you have a meadow, somehow divide it into 3 different zones and mow each zone every 3 years. So you're at least one section everything will get killed by your mowing, but two
mhm.
of the sections will harbor the insects in such a way that they can complete their life cycle. Some of them need to stay in those dead flower stalks for longer than a year. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can't mow ideally you should not mow every year, but every third year, 1/3 section every third year. And then you don't have to worry so much about the ideal time to mow. Because if you have a very wet meadow, you can't mow in the spring, which is for a long time people were saying, wait until the weather warms up in the spring. And then a lot of people said, no, I could never get the mower in there. It would just bog down in the mud. So that works.
Fair point.
That's what you need to do.
I love that you mentioned time. I
Mm.
have often gone to the Gaylord Memorial Library in South Hadley. There is a large field that extends between it and the observatory that the college owns.
Yeah,
And that whole field is full of thyme, flowering thyme, and it's the very low growth, steppable kind of thyme. And
yeah,
it's such a delight to watch
it
it
is.
here. It's
When
super,
it's in bloom, it's magnificent and it smells good when you walk on it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Good thing.
Yeah. Well, let's see if there are any other questions, whether you'd like to put them in the chat or pop on and talk directly to Heidi, you're welcome to do that. This was a really fun session.
I have a question about the time, Heidi. During one of the garden walks in Northampton for the library support event, we visited one site and they were having trouble with their time. Now I visited somebody else's home and her time seemed to be doing quite well. Do you have any hints about time establishment? I mean, the establishment of THYME?
Well, I have heard stories. I have a friend who has quite a nice thyme lawn and has tried giving away clumps of it to the neighbors, and it doesn't take. It's a question of right plant, right place. and this is another good reason why starting small and experimenting is a good idea. I do know that thyme likes dry, poor soil, sun,
Uh,
full sun. There's different varieties of thyme too.
Right.
And you certainly want one of the low growing mat forming ones, not culinary thyme, which is kind of shrubby and bushy.
Right, right.
So getting the right variety for your growing conditions, not that I am an expert on all the varieties and stuff, but this is another case where um, some of the mail order companies, I think American Meadows might, I think that's right, might sell thyme as a lawn replacement or as a ground cover. And you could ask for their advice on what you think. But yeah,
I've heard that American Meadows is happy to give counsel
yeah,
over the.
yeah,
So, yeah. Okay,
right.
that's a good idea. I'm thinking about using it as a ground cover in part of my raised gardens because I can't do anything with the lawn in an HOA. So um, anyway, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm started introducing some time experimenting with it in some very dry, compacted area that nothing nothing useful is growing. So I'm going to try to turn it into a thyme lawn.
Yeah, and then for us, with the contractor to develop these raised gardens, the wall gardens, I don't think there's much soil there because it was actually they put the boulders in front of the cement block wall, retaining wall. So there's probably about this much soil there, so
Yeah.
how much it'll support. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
that might be the perfect thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, thanks everyone. This has been a really fun discussion and sharing time. Heidi, I know this is a topic a lot of people are really interested in and baby stepping our way into. I appreciate all of your considerations, especially for how to let your neighbors know that you're intentionally doing what's happening, and how to also just
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important not to offend your neighbors,
yeah,
so it's a delicate process of communicating what you're doing, maybe educating them, getting them interested and intrigued. But just, some of these people that just, make their yard this wilderness and then they get slapped with tickets or I just think it's better not to set up that level of confrontation if you can avoid it.
sure.
But so, doing things like the mown edge and the signs and things like that, I think can really, and not making people brush against your
Mhm.
your plants as they're walking down the sidewalk. It's all, it's meeting people halfway.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing too the research that happened right here in our area in Springfield of the suburban taller
Yeah.
lawn not
Yeah,
being able
she
to
has a
have.
great article. It's called The Lazy Lawn by
That's great.
Susanna Lerner. You can look it up. You can Google it.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. Lots of gratitude in the chat, Heidi.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming sessions. Have a good night.